First, I would like to go over today's agenda. We will be beginning with opening remarks from HCJI's president, followed by the senior panelist and moderator introduction. We will then have a discussion with our two senior panelists to dive deeper into their personal stories on starting a career in Japan. After that, our two student panelists will join the discussion to share what led to them having a career in Japan, how they build their networks, and what place do young global talents have in Japanese society. After the hour-long panel discussions, we will have a 15-minute Q&A session. If you have any questions for the panelists, you can submit your questions throughout the event or raise your hand to be able to unmute yourself and speak up. We will end with closing remarks and announcements from JPort.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all here today. My name is Mcinerney, and I'm the president of the Harvard College Japan Initiative. So I wanted to talk about the organization a little bit before we move on to today's panel. So the Harvard College Japan Initiative started with a group of students coming from very different backgrounds, from science, humanities, but what we all had in common was a shared passion for Japan. And since then, we have grown into an organization with over 30 undergraduate members at Harvard. And just like our members come from various backgrounds, we have been holding different activities over the years. So we have been doing things like holding educational seminars for Japanese high school students to learn about critical thinking in the American education system, planning university-wide panels with Japan scholars, and coordinating some short-term exchange programs with universities in Japan, notably Keio University and Kansai Gakuin University. And we even staged a career fair for students who are interested in pursuing a career in Japan. So we have been doing a lot of different things, and I dare to say that we are one of the few student organizations in the US dedicated to helping students fulfill their academic and professional goals in Japan. So for us, this program represents a big step forward because we're able to share some of that knowledge and some of those experiences with all of you. So I'm very excited for you all to hear from the panelists. I would like to thank the panelists and JPort for helping to make this happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. It's great to hear from you again. From now, we will be introducing our senior panelists. Okay, first we have Paul Mcinerney. He is a general partner at Incubate Fund, a leading seed stage investor founded in Japan in 2010 with over $840 million AUM. He joined Incubate Fund in March 2021 after an 18-year career at McKinsey & Company, where he was a senior partner leading the consumer sector in Asia. Paul-san, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Nicole. I'm just turning on my video now. Welcome everyone to the event. Delighted to be joining today, and delighted to see the interest in Japan from outside of Japan, given my own background. As Nicole kindly mentioned, I previously was at McKinsey & Company for 18 years, at Incubate Fund now for just a year. I've actually been in Japan about 32 years now, and I first came out of high school. Did a year of exchange and then did my university degree here. But I have many kohai who have come through the system and come to Japan after university outside, like from Australia and the US, and had great careers at Japanese companies. So I'm hoping today we can provide some hints and tips as to how to make that happen.
Thank you so much, Paul-san. It's lovely to have you here. Next up, we have Sylvia-san. She is a business and marketing strategist with 20 years experience developing and building brands for a variety of B2C products and services and platforms. Her expertise has been built through working at industry giants including Netflix, Dentsu, Ernst & Young, and J. Walter Thompson across 5 continents. She has just published a new book in Japanese called Startup Nippon, focused on how to create a more innovative and brighter future for businesses as well as individuals. Sylvia-san, would you like to say a few words?
Absolutely. So nice to meet everyone. So I came to Japan originally I was lucky enough to get a scholarship, essentially. I came right after high school with zero Japanese knowledge, but I was very focused, right? So like, because I was just like, as many of you, I'm sure on the call and Simon mentioned as well, I really had a vested interest in Japan and the Japanese culture, etc. So that's what brought me here. So since I graduated, I worked really all around the world, but my heart brought me back, so to speak, because I got so much from this country. I thought that I should give something back to this country as well in a more mature state when I originally graduated and started my career here. And especially since I came back, I've been, and the past few years, I have been quite passionate about trying to help similar foreign students like I was before, especially my alma mater at Tokyo University, and try to help these young professionals, like, be more successful than I was when I potentially, when I started my career. So I'm super excited about this panel. Hopefully we can, with Paul, we can provide some insights about opportunities here in this country and where we see, it's what we see coming. So thank you, everyone, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sylvia-san. I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights. Finally, we will introduce our moderator for today, the CEO of SPeak Corporation, Hiromi Karahashi. Hiromi-san founded SPeak in 2019 to follow his passion to create a society where global people make global companies through JPort, JPort, a diversity recruitment platform. He spent 8 years in Vermont and NYC in the US for his high school and university years. After working for a large enterprise, SME, and startup, he is now leading JPort by SPeak Corporation. Hiromi-san, you may now take the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nicole. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Paul-san, Sylvia-san, for being here today. How are you guys doing today, Paul-san, Sylvia-san? Are you guys doing okay?
Doing very well, thank you.
Okay. So I guess we can dive into the first question, but for the senior panel discussion, we're going to be spending time until 11:30, and after that, 2 students will join us. And the first question is something that actually you guys have already kind of answered. How did you get your career started? So you guys came to Japan as an international student. I think I want to jump right into the second question already. So Paul-san, Sylvia-san, you guys are both involved very much in the startup community in Japan. Incubate Fund obviously is one of the biggest venture capitalists in Japan, and Paul-san is a general partner there. Sylvia-san, your company, Paydi, you're the CMO over there, and was acquired by PayPal, $30 million US last year, which was one of the biggest M&A history in Japan, I think. So what do you guys say about the startup landscape in Japan for foreigners in general?
So just a couple of thoughts. This is one of the reasons why I left McKinsey and joined Incubate Fund, was because I was so excited about what's happening in startups in Japan. I'll just share a couple of macro numbers to give you a feel for the scale and the growth, and then talk a little bit about why for foreigners it's a very exciting space. In terms of the macro numbers, even sort of 8 or 9 years ago, the total investments in startups in Japan was only about $1 billion US, give or take. Last year, that number hit 8 billion, so it's been growing very rapidly. I think it doubled in the last literally 2 years, and within that context, you're seeing much more funding for like early stage startups, which is where we invest. But importantly, as startups scale, there's more and more foreign and local investors who are investing in late stage startups. And a big part of that, the foreign equity players investing in late stage startups, is to help them go global and help them think about their growth outside of Japan. And increasingly, as investments are heading towards deep tech startups and healthcare startups, and indeed fintech in the space that Sylvia and Paydi has been so successful, there's been more and more cash going into businesses which are fundamentally, they lend themselves to sort of global expansion. And so in that sense, the macro environment's a great one for startups. And then if you look at the micro and look at individual companies, more and more you're seeing very successful startups founded by or co-founded by a foreigner and a Japanese co-founder. And you're seeing more companies that literally from founding have aspirations that are global. So of the handful of investments I've made in the past year, two of them from the very beginning were thinking about global expansion. And one of them is founded by a Portuguese colleague and a founder and an Italian. So that's just one little sort of example, but you're seeing more and more startups from the very beginning thinking about global expansion. In that context, for foreigners in Japan looking at startups, there's a lot more opportunities emerging for people to find really exciting roles. And importantly, I think finding roles where you can actually take on quite a broad scope at a very early stage in your career and learn an awful lot about what it is to manage small teams and take responsibility for important deals, which is I'd say a big difference between working for a startup and obviously for a larger company.
Okay, thank you so much. So the macro numbers and the micro, it's a very interesting point of view. Yeah, I agree. Like so many Japanese startups are getting fundraising at the early stage, and yeah, so many companies are going global, like Mercari or all those companies. Sylvia-san, what do you think about this one? Because obviously you're working at Paydi as a CMO. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit more color commentary from the other side of the business, right? Because I'm on the operational side, right? Like and Paul is on the investment side. So just like as Paul mentioned, our company was founded by a foreigner, a Canadian. But I think one of the aspects that is maybe unique to our company is that we were not like unlike many Japanese startups, like with having the vision and the aspiration of expanding globally. We always wanted to win in Japan because we truly believe that Japan matters. Is the third biggest economy in the world, a lot of opportunities, and not as developed in many areas than some foreigners might think. And for example, the financial industry is definitely one of those. And Paydi's mission is more about how we can shake up things a little bit so that it's better for the Japanese customers, and as well as of course the merchants as well, and through that how we can contribute to the Japanese economy. So it's really not only, so when it comes to Japanese startups, it's really not only about becoming or going global, but how we can help grow the economy here, because there's awful lot of opportunities. Another point is that is quite unique to Paydi as well when it comes to foreign talent, so to speak, that we have assembled our company from I think now from more like 35 different nationalities or so. And it's so popular to talk about diversity inclusion, and sometimes it's more like as a kind of a badge of honor to say that yes, we are a diverse company, etc. But actually we don't just talk the talk but walk the walk as well, because we truly believe that a diverse set of perspectives is really the foundation of innovation. So from the get-go, we assemble. So we, try to hire the best and the brightest from all around the world, whether they are in Argentina or Australia or Indonesia or Poland or Hungary or wherever they are. And because I think one of the key aspects of innovation is really how we can change each other's perceptions about things, and through that through thinking it through, actually new ideas emerge, and as part of innovation. So I think from that perspective, there's an awful lot of opportunities for foreigners, not just to found a company here, but also to work for one and really shake things up, so to speak, for the better.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. Paul-san, what do you think about the D&I aspect of is it people say that D&I makes your company stronger? That's what a lot of people says. But according to your experience, do you think D&I will give positive impact on business?
Yeah, I think to Sylvia's point, and I think Patey is just a perfect example of that, is D&I, rather than being a sort of a good thing to do, I think it's really that it's just good for business. And to give you a very real concrete example for myself is when I joined Incubate Fund in March last year, the reason why I was invited to join the partnership was that my other four colleagues are all Japanese male and sort of between 40 and 50 years of age, give or take. And they felt as they grew that just bringing in someone with a very different background, I have, some, sort of investment experience as an individual, but not much. And I'm certainly not, when I joined, I certainly wasn't an experienced venture capitalist. But they took that risk to allow me to join the partnership because they just wanted a sort of a different perspective. They wanted a different life view, different experiences that had helped catalyze new ways of approaching things. And so over the past year since I've joined, as a firm, we've tried a whole bunch of new things. We've expanded the investors from overseas who invested with us. We have, I think for the first time, I've invested in a couple of companies where the founders literally don't speak Japanese. And our associate group as well is also diversified. We recently had Skylar join from, she's from the US, and the makeup of our small sort of team has already started to change. So I think that, and as a result, you're seeing very different perspectives. You're seeing very different ways of looking at things that's sort of helping the firm to evolve. So I think that's just one small example on a very personal level, but I think you find that quite broadly is when you bring someone in who has a different worldview and a different background, it's very powerful in terms of how you can solve problems and drive impact.
Right. Thank you so much. I think, it's quite interesting because I think Paul-san, Sylvia, you guys being here in Japan for so many years, but was it like it? Like, I mean, like right now it's like 2021, but how about like when it was like, when it just turned 2000 or 2001, 2002, was things like this or it changed? Or what do you guys think?
It's changed a lot.
It's changed a lot.
When I was looking for work in 1997, and I'm going to betray my age a little bit here, but they had this thing called the Recruit Book, which was literally an encyclopedia of all companies in Japan looking for employees, and they'd send it to all 300,000 or 350,000 university students in Japan. So you had this huge package of like literally almost encyclopedia-sized books arrive on your doorstep. So when I was looking for work, it was much more analog. There was very little visibility into what opportunities were available and who was open to having different profiles. So I think that now, students looking for work now are blessed, and there's just so much more transparency as to what's out there, and so many opportunities to connect with, for example, senpai from similar sort of backgrounds and learn. So I think that transparency is the biggest thing. That when I was looking for work, there was no media available to sort of tell who was looking for overseas different profiles. And you really just have to guess based on information available. So I think that's changed dramatically at a minimum.
Yeah, and then besides that, I think besides transparency, I think the other is understanding. So compared to 20 years ago or 25 years ago when, and I'm not going to give out my age, but 25 years ago when, for example, Paul started his career. And it was in terms of I think both Paul and I. So first, I tried the traditional way of finding a job. So shukatsu. The shukatsu is in Japan, when you're third grade and you go to these mass orientations of big companies and yes, I bought the suit and whatever, and then I thought oh my goodness, this is really the suit and the bag and whatever it's needed, right, and the shoes and I went to a couple of these and I looked around and I was really the only foreigner. Every single time, and I was like, oh my goodness, and like, you know, it's not really me. So so that was really not a pleasant experience. And plus, like, you know, it's when I was for example, I was trying to get into one of the big four consulting companies, and you know, the partner is telling you that, hey, like, you know, you're a foreigner and a woman, like, you know, it's not really a good combination. Why would I invest in you? Like, you know, that kind of thing. And all my male classmates with much worse grades, like, you know, they got in. I was like, oh my God, you know, this is really not me. So so then I had to choose another path, like, you know, that's really just more focused into trying to find opportunities. But so that kind of an understanding is definitely night and day now. So if you just look around in daily life in Japan, so from restaurant menus to metro information, so everything is very actually everything is quite foreign friendly, so to speak. So, like, you know, because that the basic level of understanding has been evolving. That's why, like, you know, the evolution in the in recruitment and finding the job for example, foreign talent, or like, you know, from an employer perspective as well. I think it's been really a tremendous change this past 2 decades.
That's very shocking to hear your experience with the big four, one of the big four company. That's a shame.
But it helped me focus, like, you know, it is not a negative experience. Like, it might come across as negative, but it made me super focused.
Okay.
So, like, you know, from that perspective, actually, it was like, you know, of course, like that very moment, it was not a good experience. But I think, like, it's more about, like, how we can reframe things and put like, you know, it's in a better, like, you know, how it can motivate us, like, you know, some of these experiences. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Paul-san, I think you have been, you had clients, domestic clients when you were in McKinsey as well. I think you saw these Japanese salary people in the past decade as well. Have they changed their mindset about D&I or women or foreigner? What do you think about that?
So I had an interesting experience at McKinsey and Company where we had a bit of a breakthrough. I would say about 5 to 7 years ago. And the breakthrough was that McKinsey in Japan works with very large corporations, a mix of like multinationals and also very sort of large, well-respected Japanese corporations. And the basic assumption had always been that having partners from overseas work with Japanese clients would work fine. They bring expertise and, you know, perspectives, etc. But having more junior team members who are, you know, for example, don't speak Japanese, like what we'd call a project manager, work with clients would be a real challenge. Like the assumption was it wouldn't work. And McKinsey Japan has been growing very quickly. And about 5 to 7 years ago, I think they said, look, we just need to bring in manager level, so project managers from overseas, and use translators just to do the work that, you know, we had available. And there was a lot of debate. You know, is this going to work? How are Japanese clients going to react to having a translator come in with a full-time project manager? And it was a roaring success. It was just quite remarkable. And I think the big discovery there was that if someone brings, like I said, a different worldview, a little bit of expertise, and, you know, a strong work ethic, then pretty well, in that sense, there's sort of a very strong acceptance by, you know, large Japanese corporations who have very few foreigners and many people don't speak Japanese, with the right context and setup. So that was obviously it's not as broad-based, given that McKinsey only serves a smaller number of corporations, but it was quite striking that if you make the effort to ensure that communication is going to work okay, and then you ensure that the people you're bringing are sort of high-quality individuals who have something to contribute, that it'll work well. So that was one big shift that I saw. If I think 20 years ago, that would have never been really possible, probably wouldn't have worked, but more recently we've seen more openness on that front.
Yeah, and if I may add one point to that, I think many companies actually have been successful of using foreign talent strategically. And what I mean strategically is that there's definitely, it's not all, I mean, recently maybe even more so, but even like, for example, like 2 decades ago, I think, or even more before, that there's this tendency of in Japan that there is some appreciation for the black sheep, right? Like I think like many of you on the call like familiar with the Paris the Kurobuna, the Paris the Paris expedition, like and it came like to shake things up, like the Tokugawa shogunate and all that. So, but actually, like that, but to date, there is this expression in Japanese, right? Like the black sheep, and how actually sometimes these kind of foreign talent, if they are leveraged strategically, then we can make so we can achieve successes quicker. For example, for a company, I'm not talking about personal success, but for example, like companies, like when we want to change something, because then if it is approached correctly, then this kind of foreign talent can bring that kind of a different point of view and can sell it easier. Unlike when, for example, Japanese tries to sell in the same thing. So like I think it's also from an employer perspective, like like when some of the bigger change is needed, for example, it can work very, very well.
That is a very interesting point. For information for the audience, Kurofune is something that came. It's like a foreign endeavor. People on adventure came to Japan back in Edo period. So like, bringing Kurofune is like, injecting stimulus into a very old organization kind of expression that we use in Japanese. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think I want to get to more about it, but how about we welcome the student panelists as well over here. From here on, we're going to be speaking more about the shukatsu, the job hunting process, and also like, the opportunities that they have acquired, and also building like network in Japan. So Nicole, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you so much, Hiromi-san. And thank you again, Paul-san and Sylvia-san, for sharing. It's really wonderful to hear that job hunting and the Japanese career landscape is changing with how it treats global talents. With that, moving on with the program, I would like to introduce our two student panelists. First, we have Sean Barrett, a graduate from Harvard College with an AB in Neuroscience, a secondary field in East Asian Studies, and a language citation in Japanese. After conducting neuroscience research in labs at Harvard and at the University of Tokyo, he took a leave of absence to work in Tokyo as an intern in the global recruitment team at Sony HQ. He returned to work with the same team throughout the summer of 2021 and will be joining Sony as a full-time member with a split role, working on both the global recruitment team and the global business development team. Sean, would you like to say a few words?
Sure thing, yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here and to answer any questions that people have at the end of the session, and excited to get into it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, next up we have Matin Kadem. Matin joined LEK Consulting's Tokyo office in 2020. Prior to this, Matin worked as a researcher in the Graduate School of Economics at the University of Tokyo, where his research was focused on evaluating policies related to Japan's aging population and falling birth rate. Matin studied economics at the University of Cambridge and graduated in 2017, after which he moved to Japan on the Daiwa Scholarship, a British program intended to strengthen ties between UK and Japan. Matin, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be speaking here today. I think it's actually really wonderful that this kind of event is even occurring. I was just thinking, 4 years ago when I was a student, it would have been amazing to have this kind of event. So thank you to Simon and the rest of the Harvard College Japan Initiative, as well as JPort, for organizing it, and also giving me the opportunity to speak. I don't know how much I can bring, but I'm happy to share my experiences. I think it's also, we're very fortunate to have Paul and Sylvia speaking. I was also taking notes. There's a lot. I think that's we can get from their experience going back a number of decades. So I think it's really wonderful and pleasure to be speaking.
Okay, thank you so much, Matin. Okay, I will now be passing the mic back to our moderator, Hiromi-san.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Nicole, Paulson and Sylvia-san can come back and yeah, thank you, Paulson. Paulson, Sylvia, you guys can turn your video on as well. Thank you. Thank you. So before I get into the questions for student panelists, Sean, Martin, I think do you guys might want to ask some question to Paul and Sylvia, since you guys are over here today. Do you guys have any question to Paulson and Sylvia?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, man.
Sure. I had one for Paul. So at LEK, a lot of what we're doing is healthcare related, and I'm really interested actually to hear if you were mentioning about the startup scene in Japan last few years. I was wondering if either specific companies in healthcare or just certain ideas which you've seen which get you really excited in healthcare in particular. I'd be really interested to hear if you had any thoughts. Just kind of more of a selfish question related to my work, but yeah, if you had.
Yeah, if you think about the startup landscape in Japan, healthcare is a big theme. And just coincidentally, literally yesterday, I was connecting a former McKinsey colleague who's currently in Switzerland with one of our portfolio companies in this space, and it's synthetic biology. And so that space, the whole notion of sort of AI-driven drug discovery is a really hot sort of space globally. And one of our portfolio companies called Synthetic Gestalt is one of the leaders in the space. So they're just one example out of many. I've probably had discussions with over a dozen healthcare companies, startups in Japan over the past year, all with very strong teams and really fascinating models. So for people, I think people just imagine coming to Japan and working in more of a traditional sort of commercial business context and maybe retail or banking, etc. But healthcare is an extremely exciting space as well to that point. So I'd say synthetic biology, sort of AI-driven drug discovery, and also AI-driven diagnostics are a couple of spaces that are very hot in VC and are certainly looking for accomplished young colleagues.
Thank you. I was particularly excited when you said synthetic biology. I actually had a recent, I was doing work recently and seeing globally the graph just in the past few quarters of synthetic biology funding, and it's exciting to hear.
Very exciting space.
Yeah, awesome.
That's great. I hope you guys can get connected afterwards during the event as well. Sean, do you have any question?
Yes, I do actually. I suppose it's a little bit different from what we were talking about, but I'm actually personally really curious how both Paul and Sylvia, how you found studying at universities in Japan, especially navigating, classes and university life with the language barrier, whether you were learning on the fly, maybe some things were surprising or unexpected. I'm personally just really curious because I've been going through for the past few years, learning Japanese from scratch myself. So this is really an area that I'm super interested in. So if you could speak a little bit about that, I would be really appreciative.
Absolutely. So I had to learn Japanese in 1 year. So I had the luxury. So I feel so fortunate because essentially I got this scholarship and basically my job was to learn Japanese for a year. Super intense. It was super intense. But I'm really so thankful for that 1 year because essentially without that, I wouldn't have been able to pass the entrance exam to the university, and then I wouldn't have been able to study there. I was the only foreigner there. All the other kids were Japanese in my department, and only a few of us, a few other international students in that year, anyways. And I at the end of the day, it's not only about the language, right? So it's through the language you can it feels so cliched, but through the language you can really learn the culture, and that is, I think, a big component in being successful in any countries, but I think in this country even more so, because I think I think there is a general more appreciation from Japanese people, if you can speak the language and you have that kind of elevated understanding of how they think, and it helps you to negotiate, not because of the language, but because you have this elevated understanding of what's going on. So that's why I was so focused to learn the language, and then of course later on have a proper business Japanese language as well, because it's a huge difference, a colloquial language and business language. So And it definitely helped in my career to have that level of business Japanese. So yeah, and then otherwise I was not a typical Japanese student. I really learned hard because I thought that it's a great opportunity and a great chance. I don't want to waste it. And today's date, for example, like there are certain there's a seminar that has been going on for 30 years or so, and with my senpais we are still keep in touch, and like, you know, with old senpais as well, right? So like, you know, there's definitely an asset like that you bring you know, through those years, and or with Paul, like, you know, we are in the same scholarship, so there's definitely that kind of a connection, that kind of a connection to other students like that, and it's a huge asset. I really believe that it's a huge asset, on a personal level and as well as on a professional level as well.
Agree. So for me, very similar to Sylvia. I had a bit of a head start. I had a year exchange, and then I started university in Australia, dropped out, and came back on the same scholarship as Sylvia, and I had that year's sort of immersion. I think that for me, given I had that head start, it was a little bit of an easier journey. I think for people, you know, sort of come to Japan and often they'll struggle a little bit to sort of continue to improve their Japanese in a working environment because they'll tend to be speaking English. What I've found is that there's actually a common friend of Sylvia and I who was she's a VC here in Tokyo, and she's been, I think, in Japan for the last 3.5 years or so. And what she did was, she didn't insist in a nasty way, but she did encourage people to try to talk to her in Japanese, and she did her level best to sort of keep up. And if people spoke to her in English, she'd try to sort of speak back in Japanese. And there was a little bit of sort of tenacity there in ensuring that people would, you know, give her opportunities to improve her Japanese. And as a result, after I think it's 2.5, 3 years, her Japanese is just fine for business. And we're a recent joiner to Incubate Fund, also from the US. We're doing the same thing where we're, you know, deliberately giving her plenty of opportunity to use Japanese. And I think the great news now versus 20 years ago is that you don't really need to remember kanji in terms of being able to write yourself. You can type, right, and it'll just convert it. So I had to learn the hard way, right? I had to literally learn how to write, and sort of a lot of business was in written back then. So a combination of sort of using technology and a little bit of cooperation from colleagues, you can actually, you know, improve your Japanese remarkably quickly after you come to Japan in your working environment. Even if you're working day to day in English, you can certainly improve. And I'd encourage you to do that. To Sylvia's point, just having a bit of a handle on language, not only is it good just from a business perspective, but also people tend to be interested in you and how you learn the language and why you're in Japan, etc. And you can take advantage of that.
But especially, so if I may share a personal story, but like, you know, especially at the beginning, like, you know, when I was so determined that, like, you know, to accelerate my learning of Japanese is, I spent, and like, you know, those days, like, you know, internet was like, you know, there was no real internet. So just to be crystal clear here. But so what I spent a lot of time actually outside. So I went to these mom and pop shops in the shopping, like mom and pop shops, like, you know, selling like, you know, these bentos and whatever. And like, you know, run by old, like, you know, old couples. And I was actually like, I was so determined to speak to them, and they really appreciated it. Like, oh, here's a foreigner, like, you know, want to buy bento, and like, you know, she want to speak, and actually, but through these personal personal interactions in these shops, for example, when, you know, they have zero English, certainly, actually, it really helped me. Especially at the beginning, to learn more real Japanese rather than like, you know, textbook Japanese. And of course, like, you know, it's of course like, you know, reading the mangas and like also like, you know, culture context is the real Japanese. But I think these personal connections helped me through a lot. And later in my later career as well, I think, like, you know, it's quite important, I think.
Wow, that's so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think it was quite inspirational and very informative for a lot of participants who are here today as well. Thank you so much. So for now, I think I want to get right down to something a little bit more practical for the current students who are trying to, do the job hunting inside of Japan or outside of Japan. So we have a few questions for Sean and Martin. So yeah, so Sean, you found your job at Sony, and Martin, you have been working for LEK Consulting in Japan. How did you guys find these job opportunities? Like can you guys try to name the particular channels that you guys used, or whatever the website you guys used? What do you guys say about this? Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So my path was actually pretty straightforward. The opportunity that I applied to, Sony was actually the only opportunity that I applied to, and it was through. So Harvard has something called Crimson Careers, which is basically just the job board for the university students. And Sony happened to submit their sort of internship posting for their HR position, which was the one that I applied to and eventually got in that portal. And since I was actually part of the Harvard College Japan Initiative when I was a student at Harvard, I saw in the Slack that Sony posted an opportunity there. And so I just went and I applied, went through the interviews and eventually got it. So it was the only opportunity I applied to at the time. It was actually during March of 2020. So it was right after we all got kicked off of campus and all of COVID was going on. So I was looking for summer opportunities anyway. And so this one just happened to work out. But yeah, it was a pretty straightforward process, at least in my situation.
How about your Japanese level? Was the interviews taking place in English or Japanese, and how was your Japanese level back then?
So back then, it was actually during my third year of Japanese. And so I guess I was around N3 about, which is, honestly what I'm probably at around today. But the posting actually specifically said that you do not need to know any Japanese to apply. And so it just basically said that anybody can apply, no Japanese is required. If you know some, it can only help you, not hurt you if you don't. And so that's basically how it was posted. And during all the interviews and stuff, everything was in English, except for a small part at the end. Because I said that I knew at least some Japanese, there was a small portion, a pretty informal, just what are your hobbies? What are you interested in studying and stuff like that? Those kinds of sort of informal questions, but it was actually not a requirement at all.
Oh, okay, that's great for you, I guess. How about Martin? I think unlike Sean, you have found it through your network. How did you find your opportunity at LEK? What was the experience like?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say it's maybe a little unconventional. There's no type of how you go through your career path. So for me, I guess just to take it back a little bit, I came to Japan. Actually, I was looking to do further study. Had the idea of maybe working here a little longer term, but it wasn't my number one goal. I came to Japan. I didn't know Japanese before coming, and then actually similar to Sylvia, the first year was just purely focused on learning Japanese. It was part of the program that I was on. And then after that, was doing an internship, again, part of the program that I came on at University of Tokyo. So originally, it wasn't so much, I wasn't focused on the job hunting side. And then as I was continuing my research, I realized that at that point in time, actually, further study wasn't really my next step, that actually I wanted to look for work and that I wanted to look for work in Japan. So I was doing kind of part-time work, and I'd really just begun my job search when, just through very lucky circumstance, I had a friend actually working at LEK and knew that I was actually interested in strategy consulting. And so she introduced me, and then I went through the process of interviews. I was very won over by the kind of people that were working there. And one tip I would say is it's really great to speak to people who are working there that are not just part of the formal interview process. Obviously, they'll always give you an opportunity to ask questions informally, but it's always great to reach out to people, other people that are there, so you can get them in a kind of informal circumstance and then ask, very direct questions about what it's really like. Because when you're doing the interviews, they're also trying to sell you the company as well. So it's always important to bear that in mind. But yeah, so I went through that process, and similarly to Sean, actually, I hadn't applied at that point. I hadn't applied to so many companies, but yeah, was won over by LEK, and then joined in November.
So that's great. So sort of say the network kind of helped you out. You had a friend who works in LEK, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. So that brings us to the next question. I think we can have Paul-san and Sylvia-san join this topic as well. So building a network and selling yourself in Japan. So if you're so foreign to the Japanese job hunting landscape or companies in general, like building a network seems like it's an important factor or important things to do. What do you think about, is this like such an important factor if you want to find a career here in Japan or excel in Japan? What do you guys think about this?
You mean when we actually started our careers or later? We started because
let's start with when we start, maybe.
When we start. It did help me, actually. It did help me. So certainly, like as I mentioned, in Japan, this Sempai Kohai relationship is quite strong, right? Like for better or worse, it's quite strong. But it was especially like coming from Tokyo University, and as well as like some of those it's the asset I mentioned, like from seminars. It did help. Not necessarily initially in a material way, but at least getting different perspectives. Actually, I landed on my first job as well. Like as I mentioned, like I gave up on this shoe cutter thing. I was like, this is really not for me, and I landed my first job through a connection that I was doing some part-time job at a company, and the director there really liked me, and then they offered me a job after I graduated. So it definitely helps, and so-called as you phrase it here, selling yourself in Japan. So you need, I think, unlike maybe some of the other countries, having this kind of not just at the beginning, but later as well, having this kind of different communities, or someone I truly appreciate a lot. She likes to call it as your own personal board of directors. It really helps. I don't think that it's very unique to Japan. Maybe it's a little bit more when there are definitely these kind of clusters of society, based on where you graduated or where you come from, etc. So getting these connections, I think it can just help. But you have to work. You have to work hard, I think. And the other point is that it's so easy to just be in that foreign cluster, so to speak. But I think it's for me, what really helped in my early career, particularly, is to be conscious about building these bridges, not only in those smaller foreigner communities, but more in terms of the Japanese, because that helped me create. Helped me understand, how things work, which helped me in my career later, but also gain more trust and more credibility.
That's super interesting. Paul-san, Sylvia-san, you have worked for a Japanese company before in your early stage of your career.
My first job, yep.
Yeah. What do you say about how was working with there?
Yeah. So in terms of the network piece, I do think that, especially now as opposed to back then, the ability to identify individuals who are sort of working in the spaces that you're interested in, like your own sort of senpai, if you will, people from the same university, or perhaps in some cases same country. If there's you sort of have, for example, on Australian, there's the sort of Australian mafia, sort of in different locations that you can sort of connect with. So I do think now that that's an important piece of the puzzle, and just even if it's not necessarily for direct introductions, but just helping get the inside story as we're doing today. just learning a little bit about different companies and opportunities and channels, I think, is really important. In terms of selling yourself, I have a bit of a perspective there, because the story of me joining Recruit was an interesting one. I was Recruit at the time, this is going back 25 years. They did focus groups with students. And so they'd just get a collection of students to come in, and they'd ask those students, because of, Recruit obviously is involved in hiring. They just ask the students what they look for in a company and which companies they like and which companies they're not so interested in and why that is, etc. And these interviews. And they actually use those focus groups as one way of finding interesting students. And during those interviews that were run by Recruit, in the interviews, I started to say that I thought that Recruit would go bankrupt. I've been reading these books about digital, and I think Recruit's in classifieds and advertising. And I think that's going to be the end of Recruit. And they said, "Oh, that's interesting. Say more." And they invited me back a couple of times. And then ultimately, I discovered later that they were actually looking at me potentially as a candidate, and they decided to hire me despite that. And that was very instructive for me. And the point being that I think that it's important that people understand what your strengths and what you bring to the table. But I also think it's important that people understand that you're different and you have a different perspective. And if a company is willing to hear you have very different perspectives, the way they think, and then embrace that and sort of bring you on board, that's a great leading sort of indicator that once you join, there's going to be a willingness to sort of engage and not make you sort of conform in a sense that you can't sort of add value. So there has to be an element of this of just being yourself in the interviews, and not necessarily trying to sort of dress yourself up too much as being somehow a comfortable hire. I think is an important piece of it. So in terms of selling yourself, I'd say, yes, definitely help people understand what your strengths are, but at the same time, don't be afraid to sort of put out your own perspectives and be yourself a little bit, because once you join, they're going to figure it out anyway. And if they're comfortable with that, great. If they're not, after you join, it would be so much fun. So they're just a couple of thoughts, I think, on the network and the if you will, selling piece.
Right. Thank you so much. I think, selling yourself is just one part, but people have to buy you. I mean, the companies have to buy you. So company has to be more accepting to, welcome your talents and the difference you can bring to the table, right? Right. Thank you so much. Before we move on, Sean, Martin, do you guys have any comments about this, or you guys can ask Paul-san or Sylvia-san about this kind of matter? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I had actually a couple thoughts. I think, I think as a student, it can be daunting. You're like, I don't have a network. That's how you can feel like that. What I would say is actually you do to a large extent, and you often don't realize. And so actually, of course, it makes sense to build and go to the networking events. Those are, very important, of course. But actually, I wouldn't underestimate just thinking about who you actually know. Right. So I'm talking like, the brother of that friend who, actually, you remember hearing they went to Japan, or that professor who you haven't had a lecture with, but, that they have some connection. Right. And so actually, those are very close, like much more easier to connect with those people. Right. And not to underestimate actually who you're already connected with, and then not, and then taking that small step to just say, look, can we chat? And I think it's important because, and even if they don't know, right, the answer to your question, or they're not the link, they may know someone who does. So in that sense, you build your network through the people you already know and they know. So that's what I found for sure. And then, I think actually as well, it's that in terms of the selling yourself, it's already, I think, been mentioned by Sylvia and Paul, but you build your story in a sense. You build people call it like brand, but it should of course be authentic. It has to be. You have to look at it. You have to tell the story, and then when you look at it, you say, "This is actually who I am." Otherwise, it'll be clear afterwards when you are hired. So really thinking that through early, as early on as possible. And with respect to Japan specifically, why Japan? And I think it's a question which always comes up. And people, there's a variety of answers, but thinking just really for yourself, why Japan? And then just being able to express that clearly is a really, really small but very important, I think, element which can really increase your chances here just by really thinking that very carefully through. So you yourself understand, why am I going through this process? What am I really trying to achieve in the next 2-3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's very informative. Thank you. How about Sean? Do you have anything?
Yeah, so actually, I completely agree with what Martin is saying. And from a student's perspective, I think that the most important thing to do is to look, directly around you. What are the clubs that are available? What are the professors that are available? I think that's completely correct. And so I would just, I guess, give some specific personal examples to kind of outline how that's actually possible. And so, for example, when I came into Harvard as a freshman, I just knew that I wanted to study biology. And quite frankly, neuroscience just sounded like the coolest thing on the list of biology majors that they had. So I went with that. And what I wanted to do was conduct research. And so it doesn't really seem like it has much to do with Japan, but what I really set out to do is look at the principal investigators who specifically had connections with Japan. And so I found a specific one. He was a head of a neuroscience lab at Harvard who had connections with University of Tokyo. And so I specifically joined his lab so that I could get the opportunity to actually go to Japan and do neuroscience research at the University of Tokyo in 2019. And so that's sort of one way to sort of figure out how you might be able to get to Japan through, connections or interests that you have in, for example, scientific research. Another example is the club that I was a part of, Harvard College Japan Initiative. So because I was a part of that club, I was able to have a bunch of different opportunities to speak with Japanese high school students who came to the US. I went to Japan to sort of do programs with Japanese high school students in Japan as well. But I mean, that's what I would say, being in that club, I think was the sole reason why I'm at Sony right now. Because if I wasn't a part of that club and if I didn't see that Slack message, then more likely than not, I would have not applied to Sony and I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in now. So sort of just putting yourselves in situations where you can sort of increase the surface area of possibilities that you can sort of take advantage of that might just come up out of nowhere, right? Like whether it's a principal investigator that you hear about that has connections with Japan, or if it's someone in your club that just knows about an opportunity. These can lead to really, really great opportunities and they just come out of nowhere. And so just sort of putting yourself in those situations, even outside of Japan, as a student in the US, can be super helpful. And so, yeah, there's just like some concrete examples to sort of build off of Martin's point.
Wow. Thank you so much, everybody. I think it's been a great session so far. Unfortunately, we have to call it an end. But before we welcome the Q&A, I think I would like to have a word from each of you. Like a message to those students who want to pursue a career in Japan. Maybe some of the audience are HRs or young professionals working in Japan as well. The majority of the students, people who are listening, are students today. So I guess we could give them some message. So how about we start with Martin? Would you like to go first?
Sure. I'll try to be brief, but there's I think three things I would say. First is what you're actually already doing, which is information gathering, right? So I think it seems small, but to even attending this event is a really important first step. And so you, especially, if you're not in the country, it can seem a bit daunting, but there's a lot of resources out there, both online and people. So, you got to first, gather that information together and then you can, evaluate what you want to do. And next would be, I guess, a bit of a reiteration of what I said before, but really thinking about why Japan, to start as early as possible, to really think practically in the next, I would say 2-3 years. I think it's a good time frame to think about. Next 2-3 years, what really do you want to be doing? People often say, and it's a classic interview question, where will you be in 5-10 years? I always found that very challenging and I couldn't answer it very well. And if great, and it's great to think about it, but honestly, plans change a lot. I think the path that people take often is very different to what they have imagined. So think practically 2-3 years. What do you want to do? And then, just finally, again, where you think you want to be in long term, great, have those thoughts, but just be open, be flexible. It sounds very kind of vague, but more than you realize. I think people's trajectory is often completely different to what they had planned. So just be open-minded, be flexible, and yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Martin. I think information gathering, think 2-3 years plan, and also be realistic at the same time. That's a great message you got right there. Thank you so much. Sean, would you like to go next?
Sure thing. Yeah, so I guess what I would say is that if you would like to pursue a career in Japan, I think that as each year passes, the hope for you is growing and growing, because I think that as sort of Paul, Sylvia, and Martin we've all been speaking about this whole panel, is that Japan and the big Japanese companies and smaller Japanese companies are more and more willing and open to be bringing in global talents, especially those who may have limited or no Japanese ability. And so, to give another concrete example, I mean, from Sony's perspective, I specifically work in the HR division that's very specifically focused on bringing talents from all around the world to Japan to work at Sony. Right now, we're specifically looking at building out the research and development labs in Japan, but every year, as we post more and more jobs, we're trying to sort of diversify the kinds of roles that are available. And I think that a lot of other companies are probably going to be following suit and continuing to do this into the future. And so I think just as long as you keep your eyes open, be open to sort of new possibilities, maybe some new roles that you might not have even known existed. I didn't know that global recruiting at Sony existed before last year. So I think that new opportunities are always going to be opening more and more. And so just keep your eyes open and remain hopeful, because I think that it'll be easier and easier as time goes on, is my prediction at least.
Thank you for the encouraging words, Sean. Thank you so much. Up next, Sylvia, would you like to go next? Could you say a few words for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I can really just echo what what the others said. It's definitely becoming easier to land on a career if you really want to here in Japan, and actually the government is more positive about it as well, right? With recent legislations, and as well as the policies that they have implemented or they are implementing. It's actually it's definitely more open. Actually, I think rather than the other point is about startups, right? Startups are I think they are more open, and as well as you can get ahead quicker to make an impact on businesses. To be very honest, right? Big companies, you get into an organization that might be challenging, and especially sometimes it can be frustrating, if you don't feel like that you are making an impact that you envisioned for yourself. So getting into the smaller companies or startups, right? As we mentioned earlier, I really believe it's a good opportunity to learn a lot, to make your mark, and accelerate your career as well. So it's keeping your eyes open, so to speak, is definitely the most important. But those two areas that I mentioned, it's something that I would encourage foreign talent and students to try to pursue.
Wow, that's quite inspirational, and thank you very much for such encouraging words. Thank you so much, Sylvia-san. Paul-san, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Look, other than sort of reinforcing everything Sean, Martin, and Sylvia said, I'd say two things. I'd say my first message would be, this is your time. This is for people about to enter the workforce and interested in Japan. It's a wonderful time to be doing it. Japan, big corporates are understanding that they have to change, and we're seeing that. I've seen that up close in my previous role at McKinsey, seen massive transformations and a desire to really learn and grow and shift. And then to Sylvia's point on the startup side, there's just so much, interesting innovation happening and new companies being born literally every day. So this is a wonderful time, I think, to be joining the workforce, and also to be, thinking about Japan would be my first message. My second would be to be confident. I think it's hard for a student to understand what value they're going to bring to an organization when, they haven't had that much business experience. But I think that as someone with coming from overseas, especially, and coming to Japan, I think just by virtue of who you are and the life experience you bring, you're already going to be contributing and adding to the richness of the organization. So I'd say don't be apologetic about the fact you're coming to Japan, perhaps without perfect Japanese. I think you should come with a commitment to learn, but you should be confident that, when you join an organization, there's going to be lots of, you're going to be very different to perhaps some of the people around you, that just by virtue of that, you're already starting to bring value.
And actually, just one point to build on that. So do not underestimate the power of your personal story, because small things like, so actually, the reason why I was interested in this country, is because in kindergarten, when I was doing origami, I found out that origami is originally from Japan, but actually, throughout this 2 decades or more than 2 decades now that I've been in, I have had these connections to Japan and living here and all that. And so actually that kind of a personal story did help me in small, to create just at least that personal connection, so to speak, because then there are always so many questions coming out of that. And it does help. It does help. So all these, and I'm sure that those folks who are interested in Japan, they all have these kind of personal stories, right? Because there must be something that's why someone is interested in this country. So do not underestimate the power of that, because it can open many doors, at least through that kind of a personal connection, so to speak, and the power of stories is really, I think it's really an asset.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much. I would like to talk for a few more hours, but this will mark the end of the panel. And from here on, we're going to jump into Q&A sessions for about 13 minutes or so. We would like to answer as many questions as possible. So panelists, please cooperate with us. So yes, does anybody have a question? If you guys want to raise hand, please go ahead. And
there's some in the Q&A box too, by the way.
Yes, we do. Yes. Okay, I guess, we don't have any hands raised. So I guess we can answer the questions from Q&A. Sena Vafa-san is raising hand. Sena-san, please go ahead. Would you like to state your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you for the very insight talk that I was involved here, and I'm very impressed by all the panelists and other students' thoughts. My questions was basically for the very first stage to Paul and Sylvia. Myself, I've been one of entrepreneur in Japan. I've been here for over decades, and I have been studying in Japan through scholarship like Sylvia. And I felt that after a while that I graduated in Japan, I went back to Cambridge and I came back to Japan again because of my family, Japanese family. I found out that in Japan, perhaps in the last decades, there was an issue with not appreciating the intellect level. The further you study, the further you improve your intellectuality. The big corporates, perhaps some of them would not appreciate the level of knowledge that you can contribute to the society, to the industry. And I began to find a way to build my own businesses. I'm a founder of a Runway for Hope, one of the foundations in Japan, very well recognized, as well as a few businesses that I built, and I basically sold them out. But I just want to know your thoughts on that, since you have the experience further in the past. How did you see it, the changing in this past 2-3 decades? That rather than North American or European, that they really appreciate the level of knowledge that you can contribute. How do you see that? Is there any changes now, or you think it's basically one of the problems here?
Okay. Thank you, Sana-san. It's a bit, yeah, we can hear your background, so we would have to mute you for a while. But no, thank you so much for your question, Paul-san, Sylvia-san. So the past 20 years in a decade, like appreciating, like, the intellectual levels. What's your take on this question?
So I think just one observation, having been at Recruit, where obviously they have a big HR services business. I think historically, if you were to talk narrowly about, for example, Japanese nationality graduates out of Japanese universities, historically, PhD and sort of more higher degrees have had narrow paths. I think it's fair to say, if you think about it historically. So if you have a PhD in mechanical engineering, then like a Sony or an automotive maker would be a logical path. But outside of that, there was more limited opportunities. I think if I think about the past, I guess 10 to 15 years, if you think about consulting, for example, to be concrete, McKinsey in Japan and McKinsey globally has dramatically shifted their hiring from MBA only to, I'd say, less than 50% MBA, and then PhD in certain disciplines, masters, experienced hires, etc. And it's diversifying quite quickly. So I'd say in professional services, appreciation of what it takes to have a higher degree and what that brings in terms of just being different and interesting and having a perspective has definitely progressed. For more traditional, Japanese corporates, it may still be a little bit narrower, I think. Now, for startups, it's different again. I think startups, when they look at the hiring profiles, since they're hiring far fewer people, they're much more appreciative of very different backgrounds, and it's less about what degree do you have, but more about what are the skills and the knowledge that you bring. So I'd say it's a little bit different between startups, big traditional Japanese multinationals, and professional services. But certainly it's diversification of like profiles over time, especially in professional services, quite pronounced.
I think
yeah, and then just two quick thoughts. Another is that actually it's also promising to see the level of innovation coming out of some of the big Japanese universities, those kind of so especially those who are maybe more commercial set as well. So actually there is that, and then how that is being actually directly translated into startups, for example. So so there's that area that I think it has definitely progressed throughout at least these past 2 decades, and I agree with Paul that it's more about, for example, more from an operational perspective, it's more about the skill set that you can bring rather than rather than not necessarily the degree. But actually, I'm a big believer in lifelong learning, and I encourage my team as well, including myself, of course, to learn more, because at the end of the day, if you learn more, you bring more value to the organization as well. So I think it has there are certain pockets in Japan as well, where it is really truly valued if you bring that intellectual level of intellectual to the work. To the workforce or the workplace.
Right. I think that's very accurate. Thank you so much. We have so many questions on the Q&A box. I think we'd like to move on to the next question, which is the most popular question. To Sean and Martin, how did you manage to find a job in Japan, although you graduated overseas? Wasn't the Japanese language a challenge during the job hunting process? Well, we kind of talked about it, but what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, just quickly. So LEK is an interesting company at the Tokyo office, in that actually a minority of the people are Japanese, so to speak. So it's very much bilingual, with English being the main language, some of the projects being in Japanese. So I had one interview which was in Japanese, which I was quite nervous about, to be honest, because it was my first experience doing anything work related in Japanese. I would say, you get, as soon as you have any understanding of the level of Japanese at the kind of jobs you're looking at, you really try to target your practice to be quite specific for that. Obviously, you have to have a baseline of language. I think if you're really looking to, if the job has a certain requirement, but beyond that, you really understand, okay, these are the kind of jobs that I'm looking at. They really want this level of Japanese, and then find people that you can really target your Japanese learning to that.
Okay, thank you, Martin. How about Sean? Your process, I think, interview process was in English, but was Japanese a concern to you, like getting job in Japan?
Yeah. So although the interviews were in English, I did have some kind of conversational level of Japanese. And I was also living in Japan before, so during the summertime. And so I kind of was used to living in Japan and sort of getting around. So for me personally, it wasn't that much of a concern, but I guess just to sort of speak about finding jobs in general, again, from like Sony's perspective, for example, they're actually the positions that they offer that they recruit around the world for. So not only in the US, but like throughout Europe, throughout Australia, Singapore, mainly English speaking countries. It's actually still the case that Japanese is not a requirement to apply for any of, like, for example, the research and development jobs that actually take place in Japan. And so sort of to just talk about that a little bit, there's no language requirement at the beginning. So even now, all of those interviews will be in English. Everything's conducted in English. And it's only after you get the job and you move to Japan that Sony, for example, provides funding for Japanese language training that can start from literally zero. And so for a company like Sony, it's actually not at all a requirement to know any Japanese to actually get the job. But it's sort of up to you, and exactly kind of what you're saying about like how comfortable you are. You know, when you're living in Japan, you probably want to know at least some. And so that's kind of where you can have, for example, Sony support you in learning as you go. So that's sort of one perspective. I'm not sure how many other companies are, privy to hire those with zero Japanese language experience, but Sony is just one example. So.
Okay. Thank you so much. I guess we want to move on to the next question. This is another question. For those who are working in Japan as part-time English teachers, actually there are so many English teachers in Japan, I think. What would you recommend they do to transition the job within the business or tech sector in Japan, moving to Tokyo, network events, or online certifications? So what do you think about this person's question?
I've got a number of friends who have made that transition. So their initial connection to Japan was English teaching, and then they moved across. I'd say pragmatically, Tokyo is a focus, if you will, for economic activity in Japan. So, regardless, if you're looking for work in in a corporate context in Japan, Tokyo is a good location to be. We've found, I guess over the past 3 years, you've seen a fairly healthy sort of shift of VC investments outside of Tokyo. So there are sort of quite, like in Kobe, for example, you've got the Innovation Dojo run by Josh down there. There's another group down in Kyushu. So if you're interested in getting connected with startups, there are sort of pockets, if you will. Like I know Kyushu, Kobe, there's another one up in Hokkaido that I know of that you can get connected with. So one pragmatic one is just look around for startup accelerators and incubation groups in different geographies to get connected. But that said, they're obviously smaller communities. And if you think about the scale of venture investment in Tokyo is a bit of a focal point. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily you definitely move to Tokyo, but you should be open, I think, to opportunities in Tokyo as a starting point. And as I said before, getting involved with accelerators and incubators and connecting with them, because they tend to have good visibility into the needs, the hiring needs of different organizations would be one thought. And a second is, if there's a specific sector you're interested in, LinkedIn is very helpful in that sense. Japanese people who are on LinkedIn tend to be more open, or on the margin they tend to be more sort of bilingual, bicultural, and so it can be a good source. The only thing I encourage you not to do is just to randomly try to connect people and luck out. If you're going to approach someone, personalize the message, do some research on who they are, try to understand if you could really add some value either to them or to people they know, and make sure you do a more limited sort of reach out, but make it more personalized. But that'd be two ways I think you can start to think about making that shift.
Right, thank you so much. I think one of my friends who made that kind of transition as a foreigner did exactly the thing that's just Paul-san just said. She started connecting with people on LinkedIn, personalized the message, and she somehow got connected to one of the recruiters, and she launched a job as an ex-English teacher. Moving on to the next question, I think this will be one of the last questions, probably the last questions. So I think some of the students may know the Japanese already, like the Japanese level is kind of okay level of Japanese. But if you want to brush up your business Japanese, what kind of practice did you do, or what kind of resources do you recommend to use to learn business Japanese? Can you guys share us some of the things you guys did?
I can share a couple of things. I mean, it's difficult because I think it really varies depending on what your learning style is. I think business Japanese is always, there's a lot of apps out there. So I think there was a good one which I used for the news. I think it was like Tango Risto. I don't know if it's there anymore, but basically it would have above the like difficult kanji, it would have the meaning, and then also you could have like a translation. So you can really, and you can target the level. So it's like N5, N3, N2. And that's, I think, a good way to, if you're really looking for more the business or more kind of like professional side, then that can be helpful just as a starter. And yeah, I think, so there's a lot of applications out there which can help support. And then beyond that, again, it sounds really like simple, but practicing with people as much as possible. If you can connect with other friends that are in a similar situation, and then support each other, that's
okay.
Coming to Japan, it's really the best thing, I think.
Thank you. Anybody else? Paul-san, Sylvia-san, do you guys have any things to add on this?
There are two important things. And one of them is really like the vocabulary itself, right? The business vocabulary. Like, for me, what was the most helpful back then is news, especially like the mainstream media, particularly the ones that are very business focused. For example, Nikkei Shimbun, right? Like it's not the so like that kind of it's a good base of expressions and vocabulary that you need to know. And the other is really more about like being able to speak the polite Japanese, like it's keigo and all that. But for me, for that, actually, like it's really like starting my career, and like and really listening. Like I knew a couple of people in the organization who like who I love their Japanese because they were like sounded so sophisticated and all that. It's just like keeping your ears open. But that was really more like the practice that Martin talked about as well.
Thank you so much for answering all the questions. I think we're about to close this Q&A. Thank you so much for the panelists for questioning all the answers. And thank you so much for joining us today. From here on, we're going to be closing the event. So thank you so much for the panelists, Paul-san, Sylvia-san, Sean-san, Martin-san. Thank you very much for your cooperation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck, everyone. For the
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for asking so many questions. For the ones that we weren't able to answer today, we'll try to get them answered in the emails following this event. To wrap things up, after today's discussion, it really gives me hope in my own job hunting journey that with being myself and bringing like different worldview and new ideas, global talents can contribute to growing businesses here in Japan. And I hope international students here today were inspired to think about a career in Japan, because there is so much potential in students like us. And as Japan is becoming more welcoming to global talents, it really looks like there is a bright future for diversity and inclusion in Japan. With that, we would like to thank Paul, Sylvia, Sean, and Martin for taking the time to join us today. And thank you again for Simon and the HCJI team for coming up with this idea and helping us making this event happen. Also, thank you to everyone for joining today. We had a very inspirational panel discussion and we hope everyone took away something from this event. Before we close this webinar, kindly scan the QR code shown on the screen or click the link in the chat box to access our feedback survey. It will only take 2 minutes to complete and we would love everyone's opinion to make sure we have the best events in the future. Finally, for the students here today, we have one quick announcement from JPort. On February 19, Saturday from 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. JST, we will be having a mock interview event where you can join seminars from 3 senpais who have experienced Japanese-style interviews and where you can try out a mock interview and get direct feedback from senpais. Okay, that is it for the event today. Once again, thank you to everyone who joined us today in the Japan Leadership and Entrepreneurship panel, Global Talents for D&I, a collaboration event between Harvard College Japan Initiative and JPort. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.